Okay. Welcome to another episode of the Heroes of the Heart podcast. The hero of the heart that we have with us today is Maija-Liisa Adams. Welcome to the show, Maija-Liisa.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Maija-Liisa is the founder and CEO of Maija-Liisa Speaks, an Idaho-based global TEDx talk coaching firm. Over the last 6 years, Adams has helped more than 100 clients understand how to land, nail, and use their TEDx talk to grow their impact and increase their income. So tell me about TEDx. How did that all get started?
It started quite organically, actually. I went back to teaching university in 2014, and the local city and the neighboring city each had started a TEDx event. And teaching at the Brigham Young University, Idaho, in the communication department, I was actually a communication student who organized this TEDx Rexburg event. And I was asked the next year to come and be a speaker coach for them, as I was also in the neighboring one in Idaho Falls. And so over the last, whatever it's been now, since 2015, I've been helping. I started out helping locally, and then little by little, people started asking me to help them either with their TEDx talk that had already landed the stage. And especially during the pandemic, then people were looking for stages because they weren't some were doing virtual instead. And so it just kind of took off from there and became global because of the virtual aspect of all of it. And so now that's what I still teach a class at the university, but the rest of the time I'm helping speakers. I just had a speaker she was actually still on the virtual stage on Saturday, but before that, there were 9 that were on in the month of March, and they were all on the actual red dot.
How exciting is that? And I really look forward to kind of going behind the scenes of a TEDx event, and also how do you prepare for that? I'd like to go a little bit behind the scenes in your life, though. When did you first become interested in speaking?
Oh gosh. When I was 3 years old and in church, and I needed to give a little talk, my mom made sure that I had it memorized and that I could enunciate, and that the old people in the back row could hear what I was saying. So I've been speaking for a very long time.
Wow, since you were 3 years old.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So have you ever had any trepidations or hesitancy about speaking in public, or has it always been kind of second nature for you?
Well, it's second nature, but yet there's always a little bit of trepidation, because I'm going to share with you something that I tell my public speaking students at BYU Idaho, and my clients as well, that if we're afraid, if we fear public speaking, which for a long time the statistic was the number one fear was speaking, and that you would rather be the one speaking about the person. I mean, you'd rather be in the coffin than the person speaking about the person in the coffin. It was that bad for most of it. It's because we're focusing on ourselves. And so if I'm worried about, am I going to forget to say something, or am I going to say it in a way that doesn't come across clearly, or if they'll judge something about my appearance or delivery, then I'm going to have many more nerves. But I can just flip to the other side of the coin, and that exact same emotion becomes excitement if I focus on the gift that I have. So if I'm focusing today on the gift of sharing with someone how they have a TEDx talk within them, or how they might find a stage or get some coaching so that they can beat the odds out there, then I have that gift. I have that duty actually to share it with other people. Same emotion, nerves, focus on yourself, excitement, the gift you have to give.
That's awesome. I've actually heard that, and I've actually used that same idea for a number of years now, in that the nerves that I'm feeling it's the same energy, the same feeling, same physiology as the excitement that I would have about what I'm feeling right now. I hadn't heard, though, that the nerves, and it totally makes sense, that the nerves is when we're reflecting on ourselves, and the excitement comes when we're thinking about, how to connect with that audience. Who is that person in front of us? Like when we're having this conversation right now, I'm not feeling, a great deal of anxiety or nerves or anything, because I'm enjoying the conversation that you and I are having. But if I was worried about, oh my gosh, what if I move the wrong way, or do something goofy, or whatever, which I am liable to do at some point, uh,
We all
then I
are.
can get totally caught in my head and worried about the nerves and so forth.
Yes. And so you knew the problem existed. You just didn't know how to flip it or what to do. We just focus differently, shift the focus, then that will take care of a lot of. The other thing that I tell people of why we're nervous is we're maybe not speaking about something we know well. You can see how a high school student or a college student might feel more anxiety if they're giving a talk on something they've been assigned to speak about instead of something it's a hobby of theirs, it's a passion of theirs, it's something they know they could talk all day long about. It's the same thing on the Tedx stage. You're coming there because you're not the expert, but you are an expert, and you speak all day, and it's hard to get it shortened down to 18 minutes or truthfully the 10 to 12 minutes that any stage is going to give you nowadays.
Wow. So it's not only the kind of the skills of speaking, but it's also making sure that you're aligned with your topic, with your audience, etc.
Yes. Yeah, that will help. That will help a great deal. That's my experience has shown.
So with regards to that experience and the people that you've worked with, 100 different clients that you've helped to get onto the TEDx stage, tell me about, and you don't have to share names or anything, but tell me about a journey that you've seen where someone came with lots of nerves and challenges and so forth, but yet were able to succeed on the stage. And
I actually met a woman at a the local farmers market, and she was very gregarious, outgoing. And as soon as she got home, she Facebook friended me. And then she said, oh my goodness, I know why I was supposed to meet you. I see that you're a TEDx speaker coach, and I have been trying to get on the TEDx stage. And so she had been denied twice before and rejected. And sometimes we're rejected. Well, we don't find out why we're rejected. We think it's us, our idea, or us, or something about how we articulated, when it may not be. It may be that your idea didn't fit that stage that year. And when I started doing this, there were 300 licenses given by TED to cities and universities around the world to hold a TED event on a local basis. Now there are over 4,000 of them. So there are many more opportunities, but they're not all created equally. But anyway, back to this woman. And so I worked with her, and she went all out to work on her idea. She enlisted the help of Toastmasters to help her practice a lot. She came to other places to speak and so forth. And for her, who had raised her children but did not have a bachelor's degree, it gave her so much courage that she actually just graduated from the university just a month ago. After having been on the TEDx stage. And I think that's just remarkable because there's power in giving a TEDx talk. And every day almost I hear from a TEDx speaker about what it did to change their life. And there are some big things like maybe landing a job or something, but for her, this is a big thing too, but we may not think about that particular thing. It depends on what stage we're coming at.
Wow, that's cool. So it's not just being able to get on the stage, but we've also seen, like, we can think about Amy Cuddy or Brene Brown or, a handful of other people who have been on the TED stage. And because of that, all the work that they have done and kind of that led up to that went from kind of a terrestrial level to a extraterrestrial level.
Exactly. Yeah. Brene Brown, for example, she did not even know when she spoke in Houston that it was being recorded. This was, I think, 13 years ago now. And it was pretty early in TEDx. So part of it was timing. So like Simon Sinek, he'll say, listen, yes, it was my message, but it's a fact I was one of the first ones. Okay, really. But it really is his message too. And for Brene Brown, the same thing. And she thought, on the way, I'm going to change what I have to say. And she spoke about her 10 years of research about shame and what she learned about vulnerability. And so a good TED Talk comes and shares the conclusions that you've made based on your research or your experience or your story and lands it in an idea. And she said, I thought I would get a little vulnerable, and I did. And I was horrified to find out it was being recorded because I'd gotten vulnerable talking about vulnerability. She said, in fact, if you watch her TED Talk 2 years later, she said, I was not prepared that 2 years later, 4 million people would have watched my talk. Well, now fast forward to today. And I think the last time I checked, which was about 6 months ago, she'd had 60 million views.
Wow.
just on the TEDx stage. And there's a different counter for TED, and then it's been shared so many, many places as well. So Sir Ken Robinson, Amy Cuddy, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, those are the Hall of Famers. If you go to TED.com, there's a playlist of the top 25. They're all in that top 25 list.
Yes. And that's so amazing too. I mean, I have read, I think now, all of Brene Brown's books. And in one of them, she talks about sitting in an airplane next to someone and do you know the story where her seatmate turns to her and asks her, well, what do you do? And when Brene Brown said what she did, her seatmate at first was like, oh, that's so cool and wonderful and everything. And then Brene realized that her seatmate had heard her say wasn't what she actually said, and said, what I actually do is I do research around shame and vulnerability. And that seatmate went from being super excited about sitting next to this person to having the window go up. And I don't know, I've got my magazine in front of me and I'm not going to move this magazine for the duration of the flight.
Exactly.
Which is such a cool story because one, how many of us struggle with shame and vulnerability?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
How often does that pop up for us? And how often does that stop us from actually shining on the stage?
But you know what Brene Brown did for the world is opened a conversation. And that's what a TEDx talk is, a TED talk. So the difference between TED is that once a year there's an annual conference, and that's the big league, which she got to do after her TEDx talk. And then TEDx is also just as credible. And you can even have 50 people in the audience and your video can take off, or you can be in front of 1,000 people and not have your video take off. But she opened a conversation for the first time about guilt and shame and vulnerability. And so now we are a little bit more vulnerable, and we kind of know some of the boundaries to set and how we share that vulnerability. Because shame, I think, for so much was just something that was a secret, something we kept hidden. Now we're able to at least engage in conversation without it getting yucky, and get some help, which I think,
Absolutely.
and that's a gift to the world. I mean, she's been a gift to the world.
Absolutely. I know she's one of the reasons I've read all of her books is because each of her books is a contribution to my life and has enriched my life in so many ways. How many of the people that you work with struggle with shame and vulnerability about getting up on the stage?
They all say the same, that there's nothing like giving a TEDx talk. It's so different than a keynote or a workshop or any other place you speak. And the first thing is, some of the difference between like a keynote and a TEDx is, a keynote is, here are my 3 main points, and you have 45 minutes to talk about all of them. Whereas with a TED or a TEDx talk, it's just, here's my one idea that I'm not here to inspire you. I'm not here to motivate you. I'm here so you can actually understand it and choose to think or feel or do something differently because of it. It's actually implementable. Like Jeff Smith with his paper towels, only teaching us how we can get away with only using one paper towel in the public restroom and why that will impact the planet. But he makes it very easy. He does it in 4.5 minutes. And I can't go into a public restroom without shaking my hands 12 times, pulling down a paper towel, folding it in half, and using the tertiary effort to only use one paper towel. And that, again, was like a dozen years ago. And that's an idea we're spreading that sticks with me.
I have not watched that one yet, but
it's very fun.
I oftentimes, and when I'm pulling off the towel from the towel rack, I have some anxiety oftentimes about, well, am I getting my hands dry enough? Because one time I was at church, wiped my hands off with the paper towel, but because I didn't follow the method from the TED talk.
Your hands 12 times, fold it in half and go like this.
My hands were still a little bit wet. And when I met kind of a dignitary that was walking through the halls of the church, we shook hands. And afterwards he's like, this, because my hands were still wet.
Yeah.
I'm just like, so
there's a reason to go watch it, but you don't have to now. You know the secret already.
Right.
And that is an example of a great TEDx talk, because I can share with you very quickly without you watching the whole 4.5 minutes. Even coming back to Simon Sinek, this is actually how I got started with TEDx. when I went back to work after my youngest was in 6th grade, I taught the second year, I taught high school, and I taught an economics class. And one of the students came up to me, who was also a debater, my daughter's good friend. And he said, "Mrs. Adams, do you know about the golden circles?" And I'm like, "No, what are the golden circles?" And so then he explained to me the why, the what, and the how that Simon Sinek talks about. And I don't hear them called the golden circles anymore, but back then I was very intrigued, like, what are the golden circles? And Simon Sinek does such a great job of, he tells a story, he makes a comment, he tells a story, makes a comment, tells a story, makes a comment, he makes 3 stories in the same comment. People don't care what you do, they care why you do it. And of course, he's talking about companies that lead should focus on the why they do it instead of the what, and that brings people along. And if I never hear his talk and I just hear the start with why, I think I can think, okay, when I speak to a family member or to a client or anyone else, I should probably start with why. So at least it's in my mind. And that's an idea that sticks with us. Now he's gone on to write books, like Brene Brown has gone on to write books. And he can explain start with why in a whole book, or do a week-long seminar about it, or he can give a 12-minute talk about it.
Isn't that amazing that, you know, a 12-minute talk can turn into, do I actually have?
I've got his start with, well, oh, just a second, hold on. I was just
there you go,
referring to with a client, so I had it hereby. And the reason I was is if I'm going to give you a statistic, and this is going to be a pro tip for people. Is that okay if I share it with them?
Of course, yes.
So pick up your favorite book and turn it over. And after the first quote of that, how great it is, start reading those 5 or 6 or 10 lines. That's the book summary. And if you'll write your application more like that, you have a better chance, because it tells, like just what we say, oh, start with why. And then it says, how great leaders inspire everyone to take action. I'm interested. Who is this guy? What's it about? Then I read what he's going to talk about in here, and I decide if I like it or not. And 95% of people are rejected on the Tedx application. And it's because they didn't answer the questions that were being asked in the application. And they didn't know how to communicate their idea, regardless of how that was answered. And this is a good way is just look at books on the back summary and think something similar, write something similar.
That's beautiful. And by the way, I can say for you, when I looked at your application to be on the podcast, it was really nice to see you be able to express yourself in the few words that you use to express yourself. Many of the times, I specifically say, 50 words max when you give me your bio, and I've literally had people give me 7, 8 paragraphs, and it's like, okay, that's great, but can you summarize? Because I'm not going to spend 5 minutes reading your bio and sharing that with other people. I want to be able to give something and use something that helps people understand who you are and get it to them as quickly as possible.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
And I am confident that I'm not alone in that, in the frustration of, how do I introduce my guest and do a solid job in introducing them, but not spend so much time that we can't remember the first thing you said about the guest. We want it to be concise enough and packaged in a small enough package that people can easily receive it and retain it.
And your frustration is the frustration of organizers too. They may get 100 applications for 10 speaking slots, but they may get 350 applications for 12 speaking slots, or 15, or they may get up to 1,000, depending upon how long that stage has been around, how big the area is, how big the venue is where they can hold it. And so let's take the odds of 100 people apply and there's 10 slots, 90% aren't going to get on that stage. And so I like to look at it as though you're applying for a job at a Fortune 100 level, or Fortune 50 even. So what do you need to do to rise above the others, so they can quickly going through, oh, I want to hear more from Steve.
Yes. Yeah. So what are some of the tips that you would have regarding that? How do you kind of rise to the top when you only have a handful of sentences to convey the value that you deliver?
We want to look at the way we write it, and then how can we make it more concise? First, brevity is really important. And you want to make it clear as well. And clarity comes from shortening it as well. Take out all the extra fluff words. Just like you said, you knew what I did. Like if someone asked me, what do you do? Business owners hire me to help them land a TEDx talk. Then you can ask me more if you want to know. You got to get their interest first, and that got to know what that result is of working with someone. And so you state what the idea is, and then you tell what you'll talk about it. So one of the things is to use the back of this, but also just make sure everything you're doing is clarifying it. And then you're coming in to pique their curiosity and even challenge the way we look at it, because there aren't a lot of original ideas right now. I mean, the TED event just happened and my mind was blown. I didn't go in person. That costs well over $10,000 to go spend the week to do that, plus everything else that goes along with it. But I did get to watch some of the talks. And I'm mind blown with the discoveries that are happening and the things that people are saying. And they're so fabulous. But on the TEDx stage, then you're not always the one with the brilliant new idea, but you have a fresh perspective and you have a way to challenge the status quo. I like to mention this one professor here locally who that first year I didn't participate in TEDx Rex, where they asked me the next year to help. But I went and looked at all the speakers, and there was one who had risen above the others in views. And I said, I want to know why. And the first thing was his title. And it challenged my assumption of his topic. His topic is self-esteem. And he said, how to lose your self-esteem. And I'm like, what? I want to know more about this. And so you have to tease us in some way, but when you're telling it to organize, you got to tell us exactly what it is. But we want to know that you're going to challenge the status quo in some way, or get us curious. I've never thought about it that way before. And it was not clickbait. It really is how he raises his 3 daughters. And I love what he shares. And he went on to land 2 others, one in India and somewhere else. I can't remember what others, but it's pretty cool. He's done 3 TEDx talks.
Wow. And I'm going to have to go watch that one, because one, I just recently finished Kristen Neff's book about self-compassion, and she talks about self-esteem and so forth in there. It's really interesting how TEDx talks and great books for that matter challenge the way that we think. You know, that rather than just the same old status quo type of content, how can we actually get people to break through their barriers, to think beyond where they normally think, and create something that is more meaningful and possibly life-changing, just like we watched with Brene Brown in changing our conversation around shame and vulnerability.
Yes. And sometimes a speaker will just assume everybody else can do it like they can do it, whatever their topic is. And you have to lead them through a series of questions to help them go back and say, oh, yeah, there is a difference. And this is it. And this is how I view it instead. And that's what makes it powerful. If you want to share with your community, I put in the chat there a document that I call the top 10 TEDx tips. I was asked one time, what are TEDx speakers and coaches and organizers looking for? And so I came up with these. And so I like to share them because a lot of it has to do with getting your mind, just like with the job, you wouldn't put in the same application to Apple and Microsoft. And so you need to think in the heads of Apple versus Microsoft. It's the same kind of thing here. Put yourself in the situation of the TEDx organizer. And there's some things to consider as you do that. Absolutely. But the number 10 I'll share with you today, and that is come and give the talk that only you can give. Because this is your idea. This is your take on the topic. For example, TED likes to use the topic, the opioid epidemic, in giving an example of how they can look at an idea. And so your idea is your take on what you have discovered that will help with the epidemic, to lessen that epidemic. So you might be a medical professional, you might be a doctor, you might be a psychiatrist, you might be in a facility, you might be a mom of someone who has it, you might be the mom or the dad who has it, or a child that has it, and you come and share whatever that is from your perspective. And how you can think of it too is that TED conference that happens every April in Vancouver, BC. It's 4 days long, and each day there are 3 sessions, and each session has 8 speakers, and all 8 speakers talk about the same topic. Not one of them, but for those 8, it's the same topic. So a typical one they always have is artificial intelligence. And I listened to some of those, and you think, well, there are 8 people talking about artificial intelligence. They're all very different because they're from different aspects of the research. It might be someone who actually how it benefits their life. There was a guy I was listening to last night, and he was showing examples of things that they put in the brain now in order to communicate, and the artificial intelligence. And then somebody else is going to talk about something completely different. It's the same thing here. You've got a different perspective on the opioid crisis, or resources in Africa, or the war between Russia and the Ukraine, or whatever's happening at the time. Another thing to think about is you want to make sure that whatever your idea is, you have to talk about it in how it applies to today. So it's always the new things. So TED would meet every year, and still has since 1984. And it's the experts coming in technology, entertainment, design. That's how it started. It's other topics now. And so every year they only wanted experts to come and add to the conversation about what they had discovered that year. That would move technology, entertainment, design forward.
Sure. That's really interesting. And 2 thoughts that came to mind for me is with regards to the opioid epidemic. My only experience with it is that I had whooping cough, and one of the prescriptions that I took to overcome that was an opioid prescription. I had an opioid base, and I had no idea what to expect with that. And the coming off of that prescription was challenging. And anyway, so there's a whole lot to be said around that subject, and I'm sure there's lots of different angles that you can take from it. The other thing that comes to mind for me is I've been hosting the Sing Your Heart Song Summit since July of last year. And one of the things that I love about hosting that event is how many different ways people can talk about, how do you express your heart in your business? How does your heart relate to what you're doing and who you are? We have roughly 20 people on the stage during the summit, and each one of them speaks about it from a different angle. And I just find that so exciting to see just how rich that is, to talk about the same subject from many different angles, and seeing how they all tie together.
And if you're an expert in it, you're also going, wow, I hadn't thought about that before. That's really cool. I want to know more about that. Or if you know nothing about the topic, you're sitting there like, this one intrigues me more than this one does, so I'm going to check this out. Yeah,
absolutely. And I listened to a podcast, I don't remember which one, but with the originator of TED, and he has very strong opinions. I mean, he's a pretty strong character. And I think one of the reasons that TED has been as successful as it is because he had such a strong vision of what he wanted out of it, and he was willing and has been willing to maintain that same level of quality and rigor that sometimes we see lacking in other types of events.
Yeah, there's been the head of TED for 18 years. I don't know if you know this story or not. He then decided he wasn't going to do it anymore. And there was this man, the current one for the last 19, almost 20 years now, Chris Anderson. And he was an entrepreneur who was struggling. And he said, oh, no, I have learned so much from these TED Talks. Please let me pitch my idea to take it over. So he gave the presentation of his life. I like to say you're only one talk away from your dream. And Chris Anderson, example of that. And so for the last 20 years, he's been upholding that rigor and so forth. But the man who started it back in 1984, I was just listening in on, I wanted to listen in on Tedx MIT. I thought it was going to be virtual. It wasn't, it was in person, but they have the participants say something about themselves. And he said, head of TED. I thought I started TED in 1984 is what he said. But that'd be pretty cool to be. Even
wow, that's quite a bio. That's all you need on your bio.
That's right. Well, and speaking of bios, Patrick is someone who just said, you blessed my life, giving me the opportunity. I did a workshop about how to, what was a TEDx idea. And he decided, I'll come, and okay, I have an idea. And then he was chosen, and I got to coach him. And he just said, all I have to do is put, I was a TEDx speaker on. And he said, and they're like, what? How did you become a TEDx speaker? And it instantly raises that credibility. So if I've been asked to speak somewhere, or I'm wanting to speak somewhere, and it's down to me and somebody else, I get the nod because I am a TEDx speaker. And the other person, I've gotten a new job because of this. It just has credibility all over, to be able to say that. And, when you put that in your bio, when you have that on your resume, when you have it on your Clubhouse portfolio or your Instagram feed or whatever, people search and they find you with just having TEDx in there.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, you not only help people to get on TEDx stages, but you've also helped get the TEDx stage in Rexburg, running.
Yeah, so I've had some different hats here. Mainly I've been a speaker coach at those early on in the day, but so let me tell you about the COVID. This is what happened. Was in March of 2020, it ended up that both of them were going to have theirs in March. Idaho Falls had theirs the first weekend in March, and they got to hold it. And then the next week it was, the world shut down. So Rexburg, who was going to have it the last Saturday in March, didn't get to have it. And so when it came 2 years later to be able to, okay, it's safe enough to open up the stage and invite them back, the people that had been in charge of it weren't in charge of it anymore. And if it was going to happen, it was up to me to have it happen. So I put aside my speaker coaching business. I dimmed that a little bit and put back on that hat of not only coaching those speakers, but then organizing that event and putting together a completely new team. But of course, for years, I've been involved in choosing speakers and so forth. So I've worn different hats. So I know what organizers are looking for, what makes a good TEDx speaker, and now got to the responsibility of putting a team together to put on an entire event. And you learn everything. And as a speaker teacher, I have my own students at the university. I say, you're not going to just speak in this class, but you're going to organize an event, and you're going to give each other feedback, because all of those things will make you a better speaker. Instead of just speaking, you'll know what's important to an event organizer. You'll know what's important to an audience of when a message clicks and when it doesn't, and why. So we do all of that in coaching.
That's a really excellent point. Having both experience as a speaker on the stage, as well as creating the stages and all the stuff that goes on with that, they all do inform each other. They like, and also times when I've been a speaker judge in Toastmasters and so forth, that each of those different roles contributes to my appreciation and my understanding of what it means to be on that stage and to be able to deliver in a certain way.
Well, just like you're trying to help other people on the stage gain a new perspective of something, it gives you a new perspective to understand from someone else's perspective what goes into planning, what TED is, or what goes into planning an event. And that, of course, will help you in any event that you're a part of, or anytime you speak. You have more compassion for the fact, like, oh, I was supposed to have my slides in and I didn't. Well, it'll just be me that doesn't have them. And you find out, no, there are half of you that didn't, and you signed a contract, it needs to be in here. And you feel that angst. So I'll ask them, what did you learn by organizing an event? And they're like, deadlines are important. As a speaker, I need to make sure I meet those deadlines so my organizers can do a better job of organizing the event.
Absolutely. Yeah, those deadlines and kind of milestones along the way are crucial, because it's not just one person that you're dealing with. You've got 20 or however many people that you've got that you're coordinating. And if the more prepared each individual is, the more prepared and the smoother the whole event goes.
Exactly.
So it is very much a collaborative effort. Even if you're the sole speaker,
yes,
it is really crucial to have each of those elements in place so that you can deliver and provide the value that you want to be providing.
But don't be the prima donna. Be willing to even pitch in and help. I mean, I had one of the TEDx speakers who, He's just like, I know I'm one of the speakers, but if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. And I just appreciated that so much. And then sometimes you have one that's like, well, I'm going to be late and I can't do that one. And can you let me have an extra hour to do this? And you do it, but you feel differently about the two, right?
Yes, definitely, very differently.
I don't know why I felt like sharing the story, but it's okay with you. My dad was asked to be an ambassador. And when the security clearance was happening, they came to the local town and all these different places. They, of course, had interviews with people. And I happened to hear two things. One was the last person who was asked something about my dad happened to share with me. He said the security clearance guy had been here and he'd been interviewing people all over. And he told him that he was the last one he talked to. And he says, I just can't find anyone who doesn't like your dad. And as a daughter, that meant so much to me,
Wow. Yeah.
And I asked my dad about it the final weeks of his life when I got to spend them with him. And I said that I'd heard this comment. He says, well, I didn't ever share this with you because once again, he's kind of a humble guy. He says, I just put my pants on one leg at a time like everybody else.
Right.
But he said, when I was back at the training and there was some sort of a party, this man came up to me and says, are you Keith Nyborg? And he said, yes, I am. And he says, I just had to meet you. He said, every single security clearance goes across my desk in Washington. And I have never had one come across where there was nothing negative. I just had to meet the man who had that type of security clearance.
Wow.
So be the person who's enjoyable to be around and helpful and kind and still, shine in your greatness as an ambassador, but don't put people out. Don't be a prima donna about it. It's the same thing.
That's beautiful. And quite the legacy that he left as well.
Yeah, most people think that, your dad's legacy was probably being an ambassador. And I thought, no, it was my dad's kindness.
That's wonderful.
So he was a hero in my heart.
Yes, I can appreciate that. My dad, when he passed, and he passed 9 years ago, when we were putting together the inscription on the tombstone was a legacy of, love, of beauty, because he was an artist and pretty much everything he did was around art, and it just showed up so much in his life and had such an impact on me. And it was something that was really quiet, not lots of fanfare. Hardly anybody knew what he did with his art and so forth, but just the passion that he had for art just really reflected in his persona and made it a huge impression on me. And I think that's really what we have the opportunity to do as speakers and authors, is to make an impression on somebody's life. And what is that impression that we want to be making?
Yeah, and we just started a new semester here, and I was so grateful that for the two classes I taught last semester, there was one student in each that in that break between reached out to me to thank me. And those are the things that make the difference. Like I actually had an impact in a positive way, maybe above and beyond the normal that you expect. And you appreciate those things.
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm curious, two things. One, is there anything that happens behind the TED screen that we see as viewers out in the world that, if we knew, would make a big difference as to how we would approach the TED stage ourselves?
I like to encourage people to actually visualize the stage they want to be on and take in all of the senses that are there and ask yourself, what's that idea that you're sharing? And just really think about it. My advice would be, take the time to think about it. What is my message? How can I make it more impactful? What do I want them to take away from this? How do I want to feel when I'm on the stage? What do I want them coming up to say to me afterwards? What difference I made in their life? And I don't think a lot of people really think about. They just say, let me get on a TEDx stage, right? Think about that gift, going back to that, nervousness. That one of the reasons Brene Brown and Simon Sinek were so successful, and Amy Cuddy too, is they were giving a gift. It wasn't about them. But it became about them because it wasn't about them. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's honestly just like you're saying about the excitement and the nervousness when
Yeah. And so those who are thinking, I want to really launch my business and I want to have a book deal and everything, those things may come, but it's got to come with your heart. It's got to come with the idea. And if those things happen, they happen. And of course, there are things that make it better, but a lot of that is just clarity and challenging and curiosity and giving that gift to people and doing that the best that you have. In fact, that March of 2020, I had one speaker who was on the stage, and I was so glad she got on the stage because she was a little bit worried whether she'd get it memorized and so forth. And if she wanted to get her message out so badly, and I'm glad she didn't wait and say, oh, I don't have it ready, etc., because just 13 months later she passed away. And she would have missed that opportunity because that was at the beginning of COVID and there were not stages open. In fact, that very stage has not reopened yet. So she would reply and do everything. But even if it's just a simple message that you want to share with the world, just do it. Don't wait.
Wow.
Don't die with it inside you.
That is a very telling story and poignant. I want to move back to something you said about finding the stage that is right for you. I noticed when I filled out the form on your website to get the 10 tips that you asked the question at the bottom, what stage would you like to be on?
Yeah.
And honestly, you had me a little bit flummoxed because I don't even know how I'd even decide that. Can you walk us through that a little bit? Like how do you find the tenor or the primary message of these different stages around the world? We know about them geographically because they're almost all Tedx, Rexburg or something like that.
And usually we do start locally, and traditionally it has been that local events want to hear from local people, and that's because they're talking about problems that happen in their local area, and there might be names that will bring in ticket sales. But that has had a shift, and there are some who say, for example, Tedx BYU, which you're familiar with, they don't even take applications. They decide as a committee, we want to have this many talks and we want to have them on these topics. Then they go research who the experts are and they reach out to them. So that's one way that you get on a stage, is because you're an expert that they found and they want to have you, just like on the TED stage. And another one is, oh my goodness, you've got to hear from Steve Garvin. I think he should speak. I'm going to nominate him on a stage somewhere. And then you yourself get on, start looking around. And one of the speakers that spoke in Rexburg, he had applied to 60 stages and 2 said yes. One happened before the pandemic and this one was going to happen. And so he needed to update his message just a little bit post-pandemic because there'd been a two-year gap in there, but he got 2 TEDx's out of it. So he applied to 60 stages rather than just saying, well, I should just look in my geographic area. So it's a balance. They're usually they're always looking for the idea. It's always about the idea. And so as the world got smaller with virtual, more stages were open to having people come from other states or countries, provinces to speak because it was virtual. They weren't even coming to your community. And I think you'll see, and we had already seen people applying from all over, just like this one who applied to 60 different stages. He was in Louisiana. He came and spoke in Idaho. But if he didn't have a good idea, Idaho wouldn't have chosen him. If they had a better one from this area, they would have chosen that person over him. So it always comes down to the idea. But you do typically start by researching your geographic location and seeing when they're happening. If you see that it just happened, then put some reminders in your phone for just a couple months from now and keep checking to see when it's open again, because they usually have them the same time every year, because you're given a license just for a year. And you want to realize that they usually ask about 6 months beforehand. So if you found a speaker application open today, that means that event is happening in about 5 to 6 months typically. So you can start looking, but there are bigger stages like that have been around for 12, 13 years they're looking for 3 links to 3 talks you've given somewhere else, not TED Talks, but they really put you through the paces, and it's the creme de la creme that comes from that. I was just working with a client, and I knew that the application was opening for one in her area. She was in California, and she went and looked, and she says, not my vibe. But it was happening. So she went and watched it. And I said, how do you feel about it now? She says, now I feel like I could do it. I could apply for the next time around, even though she's applying for the stages in between. So sometimes we just think, I'm not good enough to be on the stage to begin with. So I always recommend that you have attended a TEDx event before you get on a stage, so you understand it more. What I would say is, do not volunteer at the stage you want to get on, because there's a conflict of interest. They cannot ask you to speak if you have volunteered or sponsored there. So be careful of that. But it's just like, again, even let's take California. There are going to be some bigger stages and some smaller stages, just like there are bigger companies in the Silicon Valley and there are smaller ones. And do you want to be in a startup, or do you want to be in an established stage? It depends on your personality. It depends on what they're saying, what they say. They're like, some say, we're only going to talk about, like there's one in Colorado that they only talk about climate control pretty much. So if that's not your topic, you wouldn't want to apply there. So it's a balancing act of start in your region, then look at your state or around the area, but then start looking at the speakers. I always say, go look at who spoke last time and just look at them, all of them, and say, okay, which one appeals to me and why? And then go watch one or two of them. Go look at what topics they had, what was their theme, and then you'll start to get a vibe, just like you would in scouting out a company you'd want to work for. And do they have good lighting? They have good sound, good video, because you also want that as a speaker.
So it's kind of geographic, but it's also like, if you were to want to find the one in Colorado that talks about climate, perhaps the way that you actually find that, if you didn't know about that in the first place, is to look for TEDx speakers who have talked about climate change, and then look for the stages that they spoke on. Okay.
Part of what I do in either my private coaching or my group coaching is I walk you through those processes to make it easier, and provide lists and keep feeding you things, and ask you, I think this is a good fit. Do you think it's a good for this reason? And so we'll say no to some and yes to others. And then you go through putting your application together, and then I give you feedback on, you're not quite answering this question this way. Let's strengthen it this way, and give you the best odds of rising. Wow. Being one of those 10 of the 100 that apply, right?
That's excellent.
Because people need help being guided, and I feel it's my obligation to help them know that they do have a TEDx talk in them, and that they shouldn't wait, and that they should come and give the talk that only they can give. And if they think, I don't know what that is, I have 5 or 6 ideas, I also help you with figuring out which of those ideas would be best on the stage this year versus another time.
That's wonderful. So one question that I ask all my guests is, what is your heart leading you to do today?
So just in general, what's my heart leading me to do today? Well, it's for me to return back to speaking, because I've been focusing so much on helping others. So in addition, I have been speaking some, but I want to expand that more. And one of the things I love to talk about is the power of a TED Talk and helping people understand that. And I get to go do that. In fact, what my focus this week is getting everything ready so I can be gone for a week, because I'm going with a networking group. We have a mastermind in Ireland in a castle, and I'm going to speak at that castle on May 4th.
That sounds awesome.
So my heart's calling me back to get on the stage more myself.
So along with that, what is the challenge in that? What is your heart? What's the stumbling block that you are overcoming in order to make that happen?
Well, I think in my heart is I've been going through a lot of healing. And so it's having the confidence to share those things on a stage and knowing how they can help. And so over the last 4 years, I've gone through a lot of things that have, had some wounding things to it, and I've been dealing with. So it's getting ready, building that vulnerability and feeling like I can actually speak about some of those things now. And I would love to have other people feel, and I do, a lot of people are drawn to me. Maybe they're recent empty nesters, or they're recently single, or some of those things. And they might feel a little bit knocked down, like maybe they don't belong on the stage right now, but helping them see that they do.
That's awesome. Last question for you is, how do our listeners get in touch with you so that you can help them get on the stage that they want to be on?
Okay. So if they want to get on the stage with me, then I would have them take my Calendly link and set up a time to have that path to the red dot assessment to see where you're at with your idea and talk about stages and what it would feel like to be on the stage. And if you'd love to provide that link for them there, they can do that. You can actually go to, my name's Maija-Liisa, but that's too long to spell. So I just named my website ML Speaks. So just go to mlspeaks.com, and there's two things you'll see on the front page. One is those top 10 tips are there. And then right next to that, when you sign up for those, if you are serious that this is you, it's time for you this year to get on the stage and you want to get busy working on it, then set up a time, get on my calendar, and let's talk about what it looks like for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maija-Liisa. This has been a very rich and heartfelt conversation, and I'm so grateful for you and your mission to help others get on stages as well.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for your mission of bringing more heart into the world, which we need right now so desperately.
Absolutely. So to our listening audience, until our stories meet again, be the bright light in someone's dark night.